We have apologies for absence this evening from the Chairman of the Committee, Councillor Stock, and also from Councillors Stevenson, Platt, Broderick, Chapman and McSkill Senior. We have 4 substitutes. Councillor Michael Brown for Councillor Stock, Councillor Everett for Councillor Stevenson, Councillor Winfield for Councillor Broderick, and she's not presently here at the moment, but Councillor Val Guglielmi is a substitute for Councillor Platt.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Yes, I was speaking with them last night, some of the substitutes, and they all said they were coming. I think they might have gone to the wrong venue, as I did last night. Right, number 2, minutes of the last meeting. May I sign these as a true record? Thank you. Any matters arising? Would you like me to go through page by page, or can I take it that they are all as read? Thank you very much. I'll take those as read and I'll sign. Declarations of interest, please. Councillor Scott.
I'll just declare an interest that my ward's mentioned in here, and also my former employer is mentioned in here. So Bob Russell is mentioned in here. So declare an interest. I used to work for him.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Noted. Anyone else? I've arrived at declarations of interest, Councillor Henderson. Do you have any? Thank you. 5, report of the Head of Planning Services, A1. But prior to that, we're going to introduce the public speaking. And the first one is I have a question from Mr. Peter Harry. Sorry, Mr. Harry. Mr. Peter Harry, would you like to come forward and read your question? If you'd like to. If not, I can take it as read or read it, whichever you prefer. Fine, thank you very much. Mr. Harry, a resident of Great Bentley, asks, as a Great Bentley resident, I have followed the development of the local plan and the numerous planning applications as they affect our village. Great Bentley currently stands to gain some 300 dwellings since 2013-14, either completed, under construction, or with outline planning permission. This represents a 44% increase in housing stock and 90% of the proposed housing allocation for the 6 key rural service centres. Following the consultation period on TDC's preferred options document, amongst the many representations submitted, 8 offered land that will affect the parish of Great Bentley. Of these 8 representations, 2 have all already been resubmitted as planning applications without waiting for the TDC response. If accepted and approved, this would mean a further 150 dwellings. In response to a local magazine article, Redevelopments, Mr. Stephen Williams of Hills Building Group stated on a public website that, quote, Great Bentley is only being targeted by developers because TDC see it as an appropriate location for further development, end quote. And, start quote, there is a shortfall of housing and it is TDC's duty to fill the gap where they see it is appropriate, end quote. Having recently perused the papers for the forthcoming local plan committee meeting on the 19th of Jan, I note that TDC is predicting a shortfall at the end of March 2017 of some 569 dwellings for the 5-year housing plan. My question therefore is this the intention of the local plan committee to adopt any of the 8 representations of land, and in particular the 2 recently submitted planning applications, to make up the shortfall? I would suggest that 450 dwellings is not sustainable in any sense of the word. Our response. Chairman's response. Thank you for your question, Mr. Harry. At its meeting on the 3rd of November 2016, this committee agreed housing allocations for the local plan that were known as Option T. This option did not include the allocation of any sites in Great Bentley. I can therefore confirm that the Council doesn't have any plans to make up any shortfall in housing land supply by allocating sites in Great Bentley. However, as you point out, there are currently applications before the Council that propose residential development in Great Bentley. I also note your view that 450 homes is not sustainable. The Council is required to determine applications submitted to it, taking into account national and local policy and other material considerations, including its current housing land supply position. I cannot comment on the merits of the applications, but if approved, these permissions would contribute to the supply of housing land. Thank you very much for your question. I now call forth, I have five statements, and the first statement is from Parish Councillor Kevin Plummer, Great Bentley Parish Council. Would you like to come forward, Mr. Plummer, please? You know the ropes. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to start by saying that Great Bentley Parish Council are fully supportive of the local plan process and will welcome the next phase of this as it comes through. As we understand, with the Stage 9 consultation coming up, we feel that Great Bentley is in a difficult situation which we'd like to make sure that the committee is fully aware of. Notwithstanding that you've already responses to Mr. Harry's question, which I acknowledge. Great Bentley is currently a parish of some 1,000 houses. In the past year, we've had applications for a further 250 houses approved either by the District Planning Committee or through the appeal process. In addition, we now understand there are active applications with the District Council for another 175 properties across potential 3 prospective sites. This means that at the moment, a possible 425 houses could be developed before the local plan is finalising, representing approaching a 50% increase on housing stock in our parish. Members of Great Bentley Parish Council met in early December to discuss a number of additional sites within the parish which landowners and developers are promoting as potential new sites for housing as part of the local plan consultation process. As councillors, we discussed what further development would be needed and appropriate for our parish. It was agreed that there was sufficient land within the slightly extended natural outline of the village to provide for local demand for many years to come. We did not feel that extensive enlarging of the village boundaries was necessary to provide this housing. In light of the position Great Bentley is already in, these additional sites do cause us great concerns. 2 of the representations propose restating Angels Green as a smaller rural settlement and include for land development. Councillors are in agreement that large-scale development at Angels Green would be unsustainable and inappropriate, and that Angels Green should remain as a hamlet, as it's always been. 2 further representations in Great Bentley itself propose yet more expansion of the village settlement boundary. And the final representation proposes increasing the settlement boundary by a further 12.7 hectares. It challenges the deliverability of the Tenring Garden Village community and proposes this land as a part alternative to be allocated for housing. Parish councillors find this one totally unacceptable. We would respectfully request that the committee take the views of Great Bentley Parish Council into account when considering the local plan representations. We feel that Great Bentley has already contributed considerably more housing numbers than the draft local plan intends, albeit we do acknowledge that this is potentially happening over a period where the emerging local plan carries little weight. I'll leave you a copy of our statement and a map showing where the application and representative sites are located so that you can envisage a potential total impact on our village, and ask that if you have any queries that you please come back to us in the first instance through Kevin Harkin, our parish clerk.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Plummer. Thank you. Mrs. Angela Barnes of Wheeley Residents Association, please. Good evening, welcome.
A little story, which I'm going to title the curious incident of the missing cross on the plan. Having perused the minutes, I was alarmed to see that no mention was made of the questions raised by 3 councillors regarding the Horsley Cross site. This site had outline planning granted for industrial use, but disappeared off the local plan without proper consultation or vote. How odd that such an important item for discussion was not recorded. So the cross has gone missing again. In a discussion at a meeting between residents and the planning officer, it transpired that they agreed the plan could be altered at this late stage, albeit with difficulty. They pointed out that at the public consultations, people were invited to offer alternative sites to the options offered. Some of us did point out about Horsley Cross on yellow post-its on numerous occasions, as well as within official objections. Oh dear, the cross disappeared again. Horsley Cross is on the A120, which is badly in need of an upgrade. And in the local news, I understand that the upgrade is favoured by the government. Building a garden village on that site would not only allow for an upgrade to be put into place, but by making sure there is a shuttle bus service to and from Manningtree Station to coincide with train times, the whole of the tendering area would benefit. No worries about meeting the 5-year housing stock, as there appears to be a nebulous need. No bottleneck of traffic at wheelie and freighting roundabouts. Who, in their right mind, having bypassed a village not once, but twice, then proposes putting more development in the very place that will create another bottleneck. That's wheelie. Returning to the questions about Horsley Cross raised at the last local plan meeting, we see that a request that a list of any sites policies that were removed or added or amended be included as an appendix to future local plan report. According to those minutes, we understand the Chairman undertakes to discuss the suggestion further with the Head of Planning Services. Will the mystery deepen? Will the cross forever remain missing? We look forward to hearing the next exciting chapter. And please make sure this mystery is recorded and minuted for future reference by the Government Inspector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Barnes. Sir Bob Russell, a resident of Colchester.
Thank you, Chairman.
Pleasure and welcome.
Colleagues, thank you, sir, for allowing me to address you a second time. It's only when I was reading the minutes of the last meeting I realised I missed something, and it was the campaign against urban sprawl in Essex, who by their submission actually advocated urban sprawl in your local government area and in the borough of Colchester from the east coming towards you. So I'm not sure why they're a campaign against urban sprawl in Essex. What they mean is they're against urban sprawl where they're from, and it's just one part of Essex. So I just want to put that bit on the record. Chairman, on the evening of Tuesday the 15th November, I attended a planning workshop at the University of Essex, which discussed matters relating to the proposed East Colchester development to the east of Salary Brook, partly in the borough of Colchester and partly in your tendering district. And I'm puzzled by what status it may have had, because I then wrote to Colchester Borough Council, because when they had their next local plan meeting, equivalent of yourselves, no reference was made to that. And I've read through your minutes for tonight as briefly as I can, and I may have missed it. You don't appear also to have that. So I'm not sure precisely what that workshop was all about, because there were representatives from parishes in tendering as well as parts of urban Colchester. And I've been on this case now more than 2 years, and I'm not sure if it's chaos or confusion or deliberate deceit, because it's impossible to find out what precisely the two local authorities are proposing on the land between eastern edge of Colchester and where the garden village, so-called, will be located. It's the gap in between the Garden Village and urban East Colchester Salary Brook area. And despite my best endeavours, I have yet to find out what is going on. I've certainly had a more positive response, I think, from the chairman who chaired your meeting last time, because I, at that occasion, said that I thought we needed the widest possible buffer between East Colchester and the Garden Village. Ideally, no development in Salary Brook going eastwards between Clingo Hill and Bromley Road. And I thought it was a relatively simple request to both Colchester Borough, in whose area part of the land is, and Tendring District. I went to the workshop hoping for clarification, and I'm still none the wiser. So I leave it there, Chairman, because I think we just need that gap.
If you'd like to remain there, Sir Bob, I will use Chairman's discretion, as I'm told it's absolute here until I leave the meeting, and then I can be shot. And our head of planning will answer that question to the best of our knowledge for you, or to you, and to our audience. Mrs. Kath Bicknell.
Thanks, Chair. I think that the reason that you can't find out precisely what's going on in that area is it's early days, really, in the life of that development proposal. So at the moment, I'm sure you will be aware that the councils are working together and exploring it as a potential growth area. And the workshop that you referred to was part of trying to engage with the community and get community views. I went to that event, and it was really well attended. And there, in fact, and some of the people, I think, in the audience today actually were at that event representing their local communities. And we worked in groups within the room, and there was a surprising amount of commonality between the work of the different groups, and they all included protecting that area around the Salary Brook as open space. So at the moment there is no firm plan that says the Salary Brook area will be protected from development, but I'm sure that the views of local people will be reflected in the plans that come forward, and those views certainly did include no development in that area.
Thank you, Chairman. I was at that meeting, and I can confirm that was certainly, if not unanimous, certainly a massively majority view that the Salary Brook area should not be built on. So thank you for that.
Pleasure, Sir Bob. Look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Ms. Pippa Drew, to protect Great Bentley, please.
Yeah, got it. Thank you, Chairman. I will keep it very brief because I think between Peter's question and Kevin's statement, they've covered a lot of what I was going to cover, so that's good. The question I would ask of Head of Planning and of the committee is, with the fact that we're now at stage 9 of what is hopefully a 10-stage process, the end is nigh, with any luck, and with option T now being the preferred option, does this mean that with the applications coming through which are outside of the boundaries, the development boundaries of option T, will the local plan now start to have some weight so that we can start to refuse these applications on that basis? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Drew. Mrs. Carol Bannister. Was it Miss? Welcome.
Chairman, point of clarification. Other speakers have got a response, and we didn't get a response from Miss Pippa Drew from the officers?
No, the reason I did that, I said it was per Chairman's discretion. It was a question, it was an answer we could give on the night. These other ones need a little more thought and attention to receive.
Can I come back then, Chairman?
And also it reduced the workload on our officers. So for that reason, I thought I could give Mr. Russell, Sir Bob Russell, an answer that would satisfy him, and then things have to move on.
I understand that, Chairman. You also, I think you gave an answer to the other gentleman who spoke. You read out his
That was
question.
because he submitted a written question.
Ah, right.
Which I made perfectly clear in my introduction.
Okay.
Okay? Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Everett.
May I speak on that? I could answer the question.
No, you can't. Thank you very much.
So,
You'll probably find somewhere else in the agenda where you can speak. Of that, I have no doubt. Mrs. Bannister, or is it Miss Bannister? Miss Bannister.
On pages 22 and 90 of the documents to be found in the agenda pack, mention is made of the fact that the public consultation for the local plan preferred options, parts 1 and 2, that took place from the 14th of July to the 8th of September, attracted over 2,000 comments, most of which were received in relation to the numbers of potential homes that were being proposed for allocation in Wheeley. Thankfully, and I thank you all, common sense prevailed at the last local plan meeting when the possible numbers were reduced to 304, and Wheeley was redesignated as a rural service settlement. However, this has specific implications concerning the proposed allocation of employment land in our village. On page 29 of your documents, we are told that an employment review was undertaken by Aspinall Verdi and published in May 2016. That's one that, believe it or not, I managed to miss. In recommending Wheeley as a key employment site with 8 hectares, that's 20 acres, in fact it's the Car Boot Field and not Hawk Farm, and more employment land at Ash Farm, the author stated in section 3.9 of their report that the proposed Wheeley Garden Village could comprise an 800 dwelling scheme, and in the long term this could extend to a total of 2,000 homes. Surely this already needs reviewing, contrary to what is written in the third column of page 29, when we're told no review is necessary. I also noted that when asked by Aspinall Verdi researchers, the owners of the Car Boot Field said that they had submitted a proposal for residential development through the call for sites. In fact, they've now gone one stage further and submitted an application for 380 properties, which we hear the developer is possibly prepared to reduce that number, plus just 2.8 hectares, which is 7 acres of employment land for A1 and D1, D2 use. If indeed we cannot persuade you to place a serious amount of housing and employment sites at Horsley Cross, it would be far more fair to the residents of this village to have this type of mixed development around the Car Boot Field area than to have 8 to 10 acres of employment site there, plus the 300 near the council offices, and further employment areas at Ash Farm. And that would be out of keeping with the rural area we're trying to maintain. The draft plan proposal for over 300 properties south of Thorpe Road, adjacent to the council offices, in my opinion, should be scrapped so that we can preserve the historical rural setting of the listed St Andrew's Church. Furthermore, Aspinall Verdi envisages objections from nearby residents were non-residential development to be proposed in the Ash Farm area. It's particularly so as Ash Farmhouse is a listed building. I ask, therefore, that you look again at the employment land allocations. Wheeley should not be expected to accommodate anywhere near 25% of the total amount for the tendering district. And on one last point, both Mill Lane and Gutteridge Hall Lane have been newly categorised as quiet lanes by Essex County Council, where, to quote Rodney Bass, people should be able to enjoy a relaxing stroll to cycle or to ride in idyllic countryside. He said it's important to appreciate and sustain our rural heritage. This now has implications in planning terms, possibly
Miss Bannister.
Sorry.
Yeah, you've run out of time, but not much to go for.
I only had half a sentence.
Sorry, would you like to start the sentence again?
Thank you. This now has implications in planning terms, in particular the proposed inclusion of 2 more traveller pitches in Gutteridge Hall Lane within the draft plan needs to be reconsidered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Bannister. That's the end of statements. We now move on to page 13, A1, Local Development Scheme 2016-2019, with the recommendation that the Local Plan Committee approves the Local Development Scheme, LDS, 216-19, attached as Appendix 1, and agrees to its publication on the Council's website. I'll hand over to our Head of Planning, Mrs. Kath Bicknell, to explain it to us.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the purpose of this first report on the agenda is to seek committee's agreement to publish a new development scheme, to update the proposed timetable for preparing the new Tendring District Local Plan and some other planning documents. The local development scheme is designed to set out the process and the timetable for producing the local plan. It includes anticipated timetables of consultation periods, of examinations and the expected dates of publication. This LDS aligns Braintree, Colchester and Tendring local plans and the Garden Community Development Plan document timetables. The committee did agree a local development scheme for the period 2016 to 2019 at its meeting on the 27th of September last year. And a key date in that scheme was the adoption of the local plan in September 2018. The report before you this evening also schedules adoption of the local plan for September 2018, so that critical date of adoption of the plan doesn't change. The change that is proposed relates to the steps between now and that adoption date. Importantly, the publication of the publication or pre-submission version of the plan moves from January this month to June of this year. This has been necessary to allow critical evidence to be gathered on a range of topics that relate both to the garden community's proposals and also the wider local plan. External review of the Council's local plan preparation to date and of the garden community's work has emphasised the need to ensure a robust evidence base is in place before proceeding to the pre-submission draft. And as the Chairman has already highlighted, the recommendation before you this evening is for the committee to approve the local development scheme as set out at Appendix 1 to this report and to agree for its publication on the Council's website.
Thank you, Mrs Bicknell. Over to you, members. Any questions? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if there needs to be a comment made on the section on page 34 where it says financial shortfall.
Councillor Henderson, could you just move your microphone a bit nearer? Those of us who are hard of hearing or harder of hearing aren't quite
I wonder
hearing.
if there needs to be an update or a statement made on the financial shortfall, low risk, high impact page on 34, because it says in there about generating new homes bonus. Well, I think we all know there's been an effect on that new homes bonus very recently by the government, where we're going to see quite a huge impact of losses in income. And I just think we're not going to get and be able to rely on as much finance as we thought we would have in the past through that new homes bonus. And just one other thing is, it was raised earlier, and again I'd like it noted, and I've said it before, I too and others who supported us at that time are concerned that the employment land review seems to have now dismissed the Horsley Cross employment site as an option. I for one am still not happy that that's been taken out at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Mrs Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. So the first point was really about the risk assessment. It's really primarily about proceeding with the local plan and preparing the local plan and what the risks of financial pressures might be to that. The Council currently does budget for the continuing preparation, including funding the studies that are necessary to gather that evidence base. So there are no immediate or significant concerns in that respect. And the remainder of the point in the table is really that securing getting a local plan in place will help in terms of being able to sort of some confidence in the market and being able to deliver development that will bring new homes bonus and so improve that financial position.
Thank you, Ms. Sorry.
Did you want me to talk about Horsley Cross, Jeff?
Yes, please.
I was only going to do so in as much as obviously the site allocations is not part of the agenda item tonight, so site allocations are not really for discussion this evening, and when we have new evidence about employment land, we will bring that back to the committee for discussion.
In other words, it's not a done deal. Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Chair. I note here the moving of the meeting from February to June, of the consultation from February till June, and I just really wanted to be absolutely certain that that's not going to affect our end date. It's not going to in any way slow down the process, which many people think has taken too long already. So can we be absolutely sure that by moving from February to June, that part, that it will not in any way delay? I think I'm right in saying that certainly since I've been a member of this committee, there have been no delays. I don't believe we've delayed it for a minute, despite the extra work. We are running as fast as we can, and I'd like it to keep running as fast as it can. So that assurance would be appreciated.
I completely agree with you, Councillor Bray, and it's good to raise it. Mrs. Bicknell, I nearly raised you there.
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't possibly give an absolute guarantee to committee that the local plan will be adopted on the date that it says in the local development scheme, but I have no reason to believe that changing the timetable as suggested will cause that to happen. And even if that made it slightly more likely, you'd have to balance that against the alternative, which would be to proceed and publish a plan before you've got the proper evidence before you, and that would be a very risky strategy, and so wouldn't be recommended to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bicknell. Councillor Gina Carlo Guglielmi.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm minded to move the recommendation, but I would like to have some kind of assurance that the extra time needed for gathering of the evidence is not going to slow the process down. I think linking to one of the question that lady from Great Bentley posed this evening, what weight can we give to the local plan now? Lots has been happening. There's been a huge amount of influx of applications. There's speculative application coming in very unsustainable location. It would be good to have an update before I move the recommendation to just see how, what kind of weight can we give to the work that the local plan has done thus far.
Thank you, Councillor Guglielmi. Mrs. Bicknell.
Thank you. Well, although we appear to be a long way through the list of points in the terms of preparing a local plan, believe it or not, the legal advice to us would be you're still at quite an early stage in plan preparation. That's the kind of technical interpretation of being at stage 8 out of 10. Having said that, and so at the moment you can give it very little weight. Having said that, when we move to the submission draft, it does begin to take on some more importance in decision making and can begin to be given some weight. But it has to go hand in hand with other things, for instance, the housing land supply position. So you can't just say, because the council has a submission draft plan, we can give that weight and we're sort of watertight, if you like, in decision making.
Thank you, Mrs. Bicknell. Yes, Councillor Guglielmi.
I'm quite happy to move the recommendation, Chairman.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Amos. I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that the Local Plan Committee approves the Local Development Scheme for 2016-19 attached as Appendix A and agrees to the publication on the Council's website. May I go to the vote? All those in favour, please show. Sorry, unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, members. A2 now. I'm just about, as soon as I can find it, I'll tell you.
Page 37.
Thank you. 37. Local plan evidence update. I'll read the recommendations and pass over to Mrs. Bicknell for her explanation. The recommendation is that the Local Plan Committee, A, notes the latest progress on the evidence base to justify the content of the local plan. B, approves the objectively assessed needs housing target for tendering District Council at 550 homes each year in light of the November 2016 PBA report, that's Peter Bretton Associates report, our consultants, recognising that further updates may be required when new guidance and data is published by the government. And finally, little c, authorises the head of planning to continue commissioning and finalising outstanding studies as set out in Table 1 of this report and any other evidence studies required. providing updates to this committee on an ongoing basis. Thank you. Mrs Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update to the Local Plan Committee on the progress of the evidence that it is necessary to underpin the content of the emerging local plan. Since the last meeting of the committee, held on the 3rd of November last year, Peter Brett Associates have completed their study on the objectively assessed need for housing. The final study confirms 550 homes each year as the OAN. The study of the latest demographic data suggests that the correct demographic starting point remains at 480 homes a year, albeit with a large potential error. Their analysis of past provision and market signals shows that tendering's position has not changed, and so Peter Brett's still consider that a market signals uplift of 550 each year is justified. To 550 each year is justified. As before, the analysis suggests there's no need for any future jobs uplift to that number. The Office for National Statistics is currently reviewing its mid-year population estimates for the years since 2011 census to eliminate systematic errors, and these results should be available in the middle of the coming year. So, other elements of evidence being gathered are set out in Table 1 of the report, and they include the strategic flood risk assessment, holiday park review, transport modelling, etc. And as well as the viability work, the sustainability and strategic environmental assessment for the submission of the plan. So the recommendation, Chair, is that the committee notes the progress on the evidence base, adopts the OAN housing target for tendering as 550 homes per year, and authorises the Head of Planning to continue to commission and finalise outstanding studies.
Thank you, Mrs Bicknell. Members. Councillor Scott.
Sorry, it's me.
Chairman, I've gone through this and they talk about jobs, future affordable housing, education provision, demographics, so on and so forth, but it doesn't mention anything about health provision in terms of like surgeries and stuff. And we're in the process at the moment. The CCG are doing the NHS from the 4th of January to the 1st of March this year, maybe further on. I was hoping that there might has something in here about health. It says health and housing policies and healthier lifestyles and local generation and so on, and employment and education and such like, but it doesn't mention anything about NHS, about doctors' surgeries, because I do know if you have more housing and more people coming along, then you will need doctors and NHS. And they're thinking of, the CCG are thinking of cutting 14 million every year for the next 4 years in Tendring and Colchester. That could affect people in Harwich and Clacton and the rurals and the neighbouring local authority of Colchester. So I've looked through this and I can't see anything regarding the consultation at the moment, because we need to seriously look at that and add our comments to that. And I've looked at everything else and I can't see it in the Chairman. I don't know whether I don't know other councillors are going to bring that up, but I would like a response from one of the officers, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Mrs Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it just means that we haven't commissioned a specific piece of work to look at that, but we do work closely in partnership with the health providers, and so under the duty to cooperate, for instance, that's between us and all public bodies, not just other councils. So, that work is going on, but we don't have a study outstanding at the moment.
So, yeah, Councillor.
Chairman, I thank the officer for that. I mean, I'm hoping that we would get something in the pipeline, maybe, because if people out there have to live with future developments coming, whatever community it is in tendering, then there must be sufficient health provision. And we know that the CCG has to make savings of 14 million every year for the next 4 years. So what's going to happen in the future? Although people living in the area, hold on, you can't have a doctor, you've got to wait 4 weeks or even more. Hold on, you can't go to the walk-in centre because it's packed out. So we need to have something in writing about health provision.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Mrs Bicknell, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I didn't emphasise it sort of clearly enough, but we do have an ongoing relationship with those providers, and if they were saying there was a gap in the information, that they needed to understand their area of work better or their market better, if you like, that would be commissioned. What we're doing at the moment is working with them because they do have a lot of information about what's needed, and they work with us looking at the demographics, etc. So the need hasn't arisen at the moment for a specific study. It does get to mention health in terms of the infrastructure delivery. That's particularly for the garden communities. So there is some work sort of in that area because that's obviously a bit more unknown what the nature of that community might be. But yeah, we are working with the health providers, and we hear at pretty much every planning committee how important that particular agenda is to our local communities.
Thank you, Mrs. Bignell. Sorry, I'll get this right in a minute. Councillor C. Guglielmi.
Thank you, Chairman. Maybe I could throw some light on Councillor Scott's question. We had a presentation at Essex County Council last Tuesday. There is a new Essex infrastructure plan that all districts have fed into the process, which identifies the gap and the deficiency of not just roads and such like, but also health provisions. And health have historically been very, very difficult to come and sit at the table and discuss this. We are finally, because Essex has produced this plan that identified a big gap in infrastructure, they've now decided that it's time that they came and had a grown-up conversation with us. Surely, in my time in planning, it was always very, very difficult to get health to come and talk to the table. I think Councillor Scott has highlighted the reasons they've got to save all this, huge sums of money. But nevertheless, unless they come and sit and recognise what the need is, we're not going to get over the problem. I think, getting back to what we got in front of us, it's good news that Peter Brett have still sticking to the 550. Very ironic that we've gone back in circle, because I remember back in 2012 we were proposing exactly the same number. On that basis, Chairman, I would like to move the recommendation in front of us and thank Peter Brett for the work they've done for us.
Thank you very much, Councillor Guglielmi. Any other questions, Councillor Bray? Then I'll take Councillor Everett.
Thanks, Chair. You mentioned the mid-figures in relation to the unattributed population increase, which could be changed. I picked up some information which I'm quite happy to share, actually, because I'm confident of it, that the unattributed population increase across the country, we represent something like 6% of that in our district because our UPI is so high. Given that's the case, then there has to be a possibility that the midterm figures may leave us needing a smaller number than 550. Is that A, possible? And secondly, if there is a larger number or a smaller number, how will we deal with that? Thank you.
Sorry, I do apologise. That works. Mrs. Bignell.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's unlikely that our number will come down. But when that information is published, we will certainly bring it straight back to this committee and look at the implications that might have. And that won't be the only piece of updated evidence between now and the examination in public for the local plan. And as I think we've said before to committee, we will need to keep bringing these updates to you on pieces of evidence. And if the implications are significant, we will have to deal with them. But they may just be fairly minor changes.
Thank
you. In that case, Chairman, I'm happy to second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bray. Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chair. At the recent Rush Green Road inquiry, there was a great deal of discussion around the OAN and whether it was between 500 and 600 houses, obviously hitting at a 550 homes in the middle. However, it was quite clear that developers were going to challenge that extremely hard, and that there would be an aggressive attempt to try and push it up to 600. We saw evidence of that in the Rush Green Road inquiry. is there anything that we can do to head off that problem when it next occurs in an inquiry, please?
Thank you, Councillor Everett. Mrs. Bicknell? Mr. Meacham?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Yes, there are certainly developers who will challenge the housing land supply, both 5-year and through the life of the plan. And a usual point of attack, if you like, is the starting point for that calculation, which is the objectively assessed need. So what can we do? Well, we have already taken advice about that starting point, about the OAN, from a barrister, and he has represented both us but also other districts who share the same housing market area as us and rely on the same evidence and consultants to defend that position. And they have done so with some success. So I think we can take some comfort from those calculations, not for our district, but the sort of base workings, if you like, for the wider study have begun to be tested through planning appeals. But it will need to be tested through the examination in public as well for the local plan. And I guess it's only at that point, really, that we can feel more secure. And I suppose the other element of that is something we'll talk about and debate, no doubt, later on, and that's the other elements that are within the housing land supply, the objectively assessed need being only one of those. So I think it's about having a sort of robust package overall.
Thank you, Mrs. Bicknell. For the audience, ONS is the Office of National Statistics. No, I would. I hate acronyms. Right, any other questions? I have a proposer and I have a seconder for approval. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you. Now on to A3. Who's got the page number?
It's page
57, isn't it? Page 45, thank you. I get there. A3, methodology for the 5-year housing supply and prediction for 31st of March 2017 housing land supply. The recommendation being that this committee agrees that the methodology set out in Section A and Appendix 1 of this report is used by tendering district council for calculating the 5-year housing land supply. 2. Notes the predicted 5-year housing land supply of 4.4 years for the 31st of March 2017 as set out in Section B and Appendix 1 of this report, and notes that because the data is in part a projection, it wouldn't be credible to adopt the supply in Table 8 of this report as the Council's housing land supply position for the development of management purposes. 3. Notes the formal housing land supply statement for 2016-17 will be reported to this committee as soon as possible after March 2017. This will reflect any revised government guidance to the methodology published in the interim. Councillor, I'll ask Mrs. Bicknell to explain it in more detail to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is a little bit more involved than the first two on the agenda, and so my presentation will reflect that, but I will try to keep it fairly succinct. The purpose of the report is to seek committee's agreement to the methodology for calculating 5-year housing land supply, and also to note progress towards achieving a 5-year housing land supply and the predicted supply at the 31st of March of this year. So Section A of the report explores the methodology for calculating 5-year housing land supply. The methodology follows government guidance and external legal advice and has been sought on the approach. External legal advice has been sought on the approach presented in this report. Section B of the report calculates a predicted housing land supply at the 31st of March of this year, using the methodology set out within Section A. And it estimates that the housing land supply position will be 3,866 homes, or 4.4 years, at the end of March 2017. So in summary, housing supply is calculated by dividing the total housing land supply for the next 5 years by the annual housing requirement at a particular point in time. The requirement side of that equation includes the objectively assessed housing need, which we briefly touched on in the last item, the 550 for tendering. any shortfall in delivery since the base date for that calculation, and also a 20% buffer in cases in areas of persistent under-delivery, so in areas where housing hasn't been completed in line with the requirements. The supply side of the equation includes contributions from most large sites with planning permissions or with a resolution to grant planning permission, and also a prediction of delivery from smaller sites or windfall sites based on historic trends. Some components of the calculation require judgments, for example, about the likely date of implementation of planning permissions and how quickly those will then get built out. So it's not a perfect science. Housing requirement. The objectively assessed need is the starting point for calculating the requirement. In tendering, this has been agreed, and just agreed again a few minutes ago, it's 550 per year for the period starting in 2013 and going through to 2033. Shortfall in delivery since the base date is divided across the 5-year period. So anything that hasn't been built when it should have been built since 2013 has to be divided across the next 5 years. The undersupply in tendering from the base date of 2013 through till March 2017 is estimated to be 944. I say estimated because obviously we're not quite at that date yet. 189 homes are therefore added to the 550 requirement for each of the next 5 years, giving a requirement of 739 each year. The national guidance requires a 20% buffer is added where there has been a persistent under-delivery of housing, and this is true for tendering, and so the requirement rises to 887 per year, or 4,435 for the 5 years. It's worth noting that although the requirement for the next 5 years is 887, the total 20-year requirement remains at 11,000. So it doesn't increase the overall within the 20 years. So that was the housing requirement. In terms of housing supply, the methodology comprises the following elements: homes on large sites, windfalls and small sites, local plan allocations, emerging local plan allocations. So it can include all of those things. Homes on large sites, so that would be 10 or more is the way that we've looked at it. These are sites with planning permission or a resolution to grant planning permission subject to a legal agreement. All are included unless there are reasons to indicate that this would be unrealistic. For instance, there might be known viability issues about a site even though it has planning permission. A judgment is made about how many of the units permitted will be delivered within the next 5 years. This is informed by contact with each of the landowners and or the developers to establish their intentions, and also experience of delivery rates within the district. At the 31st of March this year, it's predicted that 3,366 dwellings will be completed on larger sites over the following 5 years from those larger sites. Okay. In terms of windfalls and small sites, an allowance for these can be added where there is compelling evidence that such sites have become available in the local area and will continue to provide a reliable source of supply. So it's quite a tough test. One approach is to look at the historical relationship between planning permissions and actual completions on small sites. This is called a trend-based approach. So we see what's happened in the past and we predict that a similar pattern will continue in the future. Using this approach, it's estimated that 500 homes could be built on small sites in the 5 years from April of this year. An alternative to the trend-based approach would be to look at the average of past completions, which is called a consent-based approach. The average over the past 14 years gives a figure of 142 per year, which would mean 710 for the past 5 years. But that average falls dramatically if you look just at the last 5 years, so the more recent period. It falls to 82 per year. So taking into account the results of those two approaches, a figure of 500 for the smaller or windfall sites seems to be defensible. So it's taking a sort of pragmatic view, really, given those different ways of looking at that information on the smaller sites. So large sites plus the small and windfall sites would add up to a supply of 3,866. So then we turn to the development plan allocations. Sites allocated in the development plan can be included in 5-year supply where they are deliverable. So contact has been made with the owners and developers of sites in the allocated 2007 local plan that have yet to be developed, and this research indicates that these sites are not deliverable within the next 5 years, but that view will be reviewed again when the revised Strategic Housing Employment Land Availability Assessment is published in the summer. So at the moment, the information we had from developers and owners of sites in the old plan, the existing plan, yet to be developed, is they're not likely to come forward, but we will certainly keep that under review. So from development plan allocations, there's nothing to add to the 3,866. So lastly, we return to the emerging local plan, the final element that we can add in. Sites in emerging local plans get no special treatment within government guidance when we consider housing land supply. They have to be considered deliverable in 5 years to be included, so they're not automatically included. The NPPF says that to be considered deliverable, sites should be available now, offer a suitable location for development now, and be achievable with a realistic prospect that housing will be delivered on the site within 5 years, and in particular, the development of the site is viable. Where all elements of this description of deliverable are met, sites can be included. So in terms of available now, the emerging revised Strategic Housing Employment Land Availability Assessment considers the emerging local plans sites are available. So in that respect, the sites in the emerging plan meet that part of the definition of deliverable. The second element is suitable location now. The tests about whether the sites that are allocated in the emerging plan, as to whether or not they are suitable locations, those tests are underway now. So we've got the sequential test, the sustainability appraisal, and the habitats regulation assessment. We don't have the outputs from those as yet, and so we can't say firmly that the locations are suitable now. Are homes achievable within 5 years? It's unlikely that the large allocations would deliver in the first 5 years, and we base that view on national research that shows that large sites are very unlikely to deliver in under 6 or even 7 years. Is the site viable? Well, the site viability work will follow completion of the infrastructure delivery plan, so it's another piece of the evidence that we haven't yet completed. So we're not in a position at the moment to be able to say that the sites are viable. So overall, there's currently insufficient evidence to demonstrate that the sites in the emerging plan are deliverable based on the advice in the NPPF. As outlined above, work to explore and update this conclusion is underway and will be reported back to committee when it's available. So in terms of the emerging local plan allocations, there are none to add to the total at the moment. In conclusion, Chair, the predicted housing land supply position for the 31st of March 2017 is 3,866, which equates to 87% of the requirement, or a 4.4-year housing supply. This figure is only a prediction and should not be adopted for development management purposes. However, the predicted figure can be updated shortly after the end of March of this year and an actual position brought back to committee, I would expect in May, at the May committee. And that takes us back to the recommendation, Chair, that you outlined at the beginning of this item.
Thank you, Mrs. Bicknell. A tour de force, may I say. May I take questions? Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Have I got this correct, that we hope to get the 5-year quota by May?
Mrs. Bicknell. I wish.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would hope and wish that we could have a 5-year housing land supply then. The indication is certainly that the position is improving significantly, and if you have a sneaky look at the next item on the agenda, you'll see that officers are saying that we had a 3 3-year supply a year ago, and we're now saying it's 4.4, so it's heading strongly in the right direction. Whether or not we reach 5 years by May, I couldn't say. But what I did say was we would bring back we would certainly report the current position in May so that you will know one way or the other.
Thank you, Mrs. Bicknell. Do you want to come back, Councillor Brown?
If I may.
Of course you may.
Should we reach the 5-year plan, how much protection would this give people who do want the extra development? I mean, you've had various people come forward trying to defend Wheelie, Little Clacton and today Bentley. And we would all like to know when we could perhaps put a little bit of weight behind the council, the local plan after May or whenever we reach the 5,000. What protection can we expect, please?
Mrs. Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. It's not the answer, the complete answer. So it certainly would help to be able to demonstrate that the authority has a 5-year housing land supply, and it would change the weight that's given to some of the policies. So, for instance, in the existing local plan, it would be easier to rely upon some of our existing policies that protect certain areas from development that we're not currently able to do so. So it's a very important step in terms of putting the right sort of policies in place to be able to make the development management decisions that I think many people in the community want the authority to be able to make.
Okay. All right, Mr. Councillor Brown. Thank you very much. Councillor Bray. Thank you, Mrs.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit concerned that we can't get anything in from our emerging local plan. There's an awful lot in there. And given that, as Councillor Brown just adhered to, that a 5-year supply is very important when you're trying to defend unscrupulous applications, shall we say? Let's not use unscrupulous.
No.
But it is important. It's incredibly important, and I'm really concerned that we give that the work that it needs to get that done as quickly as possible. So, because I'm quite sure that within our local plan allocations, there must be a considerable amount that could be put forward, which may even get us somewhere near, if not past, the 5-year supply. I'm sure this will be discussed a little further in a moment. But I can't emphasise the very first thing we see on an inspector's report when they overturn a decision that this council has made is the council did not defend a 5-year supply. That is the first line on there. It's that important. It really is. And I know that it is only one step of the local plan, but having a 5-year supply is absolutely crucial. So can we give some urgency to getting the viability for the sites on our local plan done ASAP, please?
Would you like to comment, Mrs. Bicknell? Just to say that we're all in agreement, frankly. Councillor Bray. Any other questions? Councillor Everett, and then I'll take Councillor Henderson. Councillor Everett.
Thank you. In relation to the last point, is Mrs. Bicknell aware of the High Court judgment, St Modwen Developments versus SSCLG and East Riding Yorkshire Council? In his ruling, Justice Ousley quite clearly stated a number of things, actually, but that availability now, I'm sorry, I'm going to read this through because it is about the judgment. Availability now cannot be demonstrated by showing that development on a site is achievable with the realistic prospect that housing will be delivered on the site within 5 years, but that last phrase covers an important aspect of deliverability, as Mrs. Bicknell has said. The planning judgment as to deliverability can clearly be made in respect of sites which do not have planning permission now but can reasonably be expected to receive it so as to enable housing to be built on them within the next 5 years. These would include allocations in an emerging local plan, once assessed for the purpose of inclusion in the housing land supply, or indeed in an adopted plan. Now means now, and I accept that available now looks to the present availability of land in question. But argument that that phrase covers the grant of planning permission and requires planning permission to have been granted now lacks a sound planning basis. And that is the first reason why it is wrong. Justice Ousley went on to say in paragraph 23, if the Secretary of State had intended to require that only sites with planning permission were to be included within the 5-year supply figures, something of a radical change to what had hitherto been done, the obvious way to have done that would have been to use express words to that effect, rather than by using such oblique language as available now and in a footnote to deliverable. The need for planning permission in order for a site to be included in the supply figures would have been an obvious criterion to specify by itself. I find it impossible to accept that such a critical and simply expressed factor was left out to be spelt out from available now. Justice Ousley went on to say, I can see no planning rationale for depriving the planning authority and inspector of the opportunity to reach a judgment on the general criteria for deliverability on sites in an emerging local plan. Planning permission clearly goes to the issue of deliverability because a site with permission is suitable for housing development and a barrier to delivery has been removed. But it cannot sensibly be argued that planning permission is required now for a site to be realistically deliverable over the next 5 years. I have a whole list of other questions to ask on detail, but with your permission, Chairman, I'd like an answer to that first.
Yes, certainly. Well, Mrs. Bicknell?
Thank you, Chair. I would agree that one of the tests of deliverability doesn't say you have to have planning permission on a site. And in fact, when I made my presentation, the elements of the NPPF guidance I ran through didn't mention that you had to have planning permission. So that's not the criteria on which we've decided at this point we can't include any of those emerging sites.
Councillor Everett?
Thank you. I'll move on. In the recent Rush Green Road inquiry, which was about a month ago, you put in to the planning inspectorate a housing supply calculation for tendering as at 2nd of November 2016. That requirement of 550 houses per year, coming to 5 years, is 2,750. So far, we agree on the figures that are put in this document. However, the next figure, at that planning inquiry, the council's case was that the 20% buffer on top of the 5 years for shortfall was added at that point, so 5 years plus 20% buffer. And then undersupply was added to it. This is important because it makes a big difference to the calculations. So on the first hand, your 20% buffer is calculated only on the requirement of the 5 years, and in the second time, this time in front of this committee, it is calculated after the undersupply is added, which makes a difference of around about 200-ish houses. Can you please comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
Mrs. Bicknell.
I'd agree. We did submit evidence which added the 20% buffer onto the 550 rather than onto the 550 plus the shortfall at that time. However, the more we've looked at this issue and the details of the calculation of housing land supply, we've taken advice, and the advice is that's not a robust or a sort of commonly accepted way of calculating it, and it would be much safer to add the 20% to the overall, so to add it in. At that inquiry, the issue wasn't challenged, and so it's sat there. That was part of our evidence, and it remained part of our evidence, but I wouldn't be recommending that we proceed in that fashion in the future.
Councillor Everett. Thank you, Mrs. Bicknell.
There were two planning inspectorate appeals where this was looked at last year. And to be fair to us, different inspectors had different views about whether the calculation is done at which point. So there is no definitive guidance as to when the undersupply 20% is calculated. That being the case, it makes its choice of this committee in terms of instructing its officers how to deal with these things, as to when that is actually taken. So either on the initial requirement or the initial requirement plus the undersupply is the question there. And that's as far as I'll go on that. It's just to make the observation that it is a choice of this committee to actually do that as part of its rationale for calculating 5-year housing land supply.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now on to detail of the supply itself. Also at that Rush Green inquiry, we as a council submitted this document. This document was a schedule of large sites, 10 or more, which are included in the large site supply columns. And it has, just like the one within the papers tonight, a whole list of planning applications and how they will be dealt with in terms of making up the supply. But there are significant differences. Just over a month ago, this was submitted, and there are significant differences between this document and the document we see in front of us tonight. Now, I don't intend to go through every single planning application because we'd be here all night if we did.
I wouldn't allow you to, Councillor Everett.
However, even the exceptions list comes to quite a big document, and I will try to make it as brief as possible because it is absolutely crucial in terms of determining the 5-year housing land supply that we get this right. So the first set of questions is around, I'll say the numbers for the officers so that they can understand what I'm getting at. There were 8 applications, 14009131, 13014002, 15009193, 140178.
We need this level of detail,
etc. Yeah, right. That were taken out of this list completely. And I'd like to know if they were taken out of this list for this purpose tonight, where they went. I suspect I know the answer. I think the answer is probably that they went into the built category on actually the other side of on the requirement side of this calculation. But I ask that question first, please.
Okay.
I think that's highly likely, without going through them, as you say, all individually, that when we updated the information and are looking forward to March, there were quite a number of sites that historically, in the Rush Green Road inquiry, we were saying, you know, they're in supply, but by now actually they're now built. We've been out and checked and they are completed.
Thank you. That makes it clear. So that everybody knows, that total came to 307 houses. And so that, presumably, from what we've just been saying, means that those 307 houses went into the the requirement between 2016 and 2017 as being built. Thank you. The next one that was missing is a C2 bedrooms, 1600369, which is Martello's site, and equals some 16 homes, both in terms of the first column and the second column, the 5-year supply.
C2R mentioned.
We do include C2 in the overall housing provision, so they shouldn't be missing.
They're not in this document here. So perhaps we need to add those to the calculation.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Everett. If you look at page 67, you'll find C2 is mentioned. Starting at page 67.
Can I repeat? Planning reference 1600369. It's not on that list.
One specific case.
Yeah, I'm going to give you, I've been very lenient with you and I shall continue to do so, Councillor Everett, but really this level of detail is not really for this committee. What I'd like you to do is, you've obviously, you've got a disparity between our figures and what you've come up with, and so if we could get through to some conclusions of the numbers involved, and we'll take it as read that you've done your homework and you've come up with this, and we'll try and find why there's a disparity. Okay? I may have to come back to you later.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll move off that one then. The next one, next large discrepancies, I'll go to those because they're the obvious ones where there's contention. 1200843 Pound Farm has down as 5 homes and 5 homes in the local supply, and yet at the Rush Green inquiry and what was passed at planning, there was actually 25 homes in each of those columns.
Sorry, would you care to repeat that, please?
1200843 Pound Farm has 5 homes in the first column and 5 homes in the second column, local plan 5-year supply. In fact, that should be 25.
Okay. What is the differences between your figures and... Yeah, of course you can. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think the differences that Councillor Everett's picking up are actually completions. We've just looked back and Martello is now complete, and the Pound Farm, it's because most of those are now complete, so there's only a very few left in the forward-looking column.
Yeah, I'm bringing... no, I've got Councillor Henderson after you. He's been incredibly patient. So, Councillor, I'm giving you another 5 minutes, so...
Right.
Okay?
Okay, the differences, the whole differences between the columns that we are looking at, the local 5-year supply as quoted in this document comes to 806. And in the Rush Green Road 5-year supply, it comes to 1,441. There is a difference there of some 600 houses. More than enough, if we look through them, to give us a 5-year housing land supply. And the reason why I was going through the detail is because there are quite significant numbers here on individual lines that I can quite easily demonstrate, having the planning application data in front of me that demonstrate that there is serious discrepancies between these two lists, and more, that there are serious discrepancies in here that I think can demonstrate that we do in fact have a 5-year housing land supply.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Everett. Councillor Mrs Bicknell's now going to answer that, then I'm going to move on to the next councillor. I still keep wanting to make you councillor. It's about time I stood down anyway. So, could you answer this? And then I'm going to move on to Councillor Henderson. Thank you, Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I take the point. There is quite a large difference. I would say that's part of the reason why it's sometimes ill-advised to do mid-year sort of calculations and try and guesstimate these things, because it's a very delicate operation, if you like. It's quite sensitive to changes, as I think that's what you're picking up, because whenever you take something out of one column, it has to perhaps be added on somewhere else, and you have to think about what the added impact of that is. And so it doesn't particularly surprise me, well, it doesn't surprise me because I know the numbers, that there is that difference, so acknowledge that difference, and it will be a combination of, actually, there were more completions in the last year than we were anticipating when we went to the Rush Green Road inquiry, and so they have shifted. We've also done a more thorough analysis by contacting landowners and developers of the likelihood of certain sites coming forward, and we've reassessed the risk associated with various sites. So some have come out of the 5-year supply that we were anticipating. So it is quite a big difference, but I think that's why we have to sort of be cautious and be careful and methodical about working through the numbers and doing that, you know, advisedly, with support from, you know, the barrister that we've been using, who does specialise in this sort of work, to make sure that we can be as accurate and as robust as possible with our calculations.
Thank you, Mr Bicknell. And just as a final point, we are bringing back the most accurate figure we can arrive at for the next meeting in May. and also obviously, and thank you for all your work on this, because that will have gone in to help make sure that we have really scrutinised all our figures, and I'm sure we will find there will be a reasonable meeting of minds on that, Councillor Everett. I know I'm not taking any more from you for the moment. Councillor Henderson.
Just a very short one, Chair. Are we going to, on page 61 it talks about empty home strategy, are we going to include an empty home strategy in this?
I can't even see.
Down the bottom.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Oh, yes, I remember reading about it. Yes, please, Mrs. Bicknell.
Chair, I know that colleagues in the housing team within the authority have done work in the past where there have been empty homes to try and contact owners of those homes, and they have on some occasions been able to do sort of purchase and back-to-back deals to bring those homes back into use. Whether I could go as far as saying there's a strategy for it, I'm not so sure, but certainly there has been some activity to achieve that aim.
Councillor Henderson?
No, it just says in the report that we could implement an empty home strategy. I just wondered if we are going to be looking at that and have a proper strategy, a laid out strategy for it in the future as a council.
Yeah. I think we're taking opportunities where they occur. I know it's been successful. When I last heard, which would be some months back, it's been successful where we have approached them. We have actually got some, on a lot of occasions, got some movement and got the houses reinstated for use for dwellings. Okay, thank you. Councillor Guglielmi.
Yes, Chairman. I must state, Chairman, that I felt very uncomfortable and uneasy with the barrage of questioning from the councillor over there. It's a well-known fact. He's gone to the police to ask them to investigate this. The council has gone to a great lengths to get legal advice into ensuring that the methodology and the methods and the study that we've done are sound and fully legal and comply with requirements. I think between you and my officers, I think I'd rather believe my officers far more than what I believe you, Councillor Everett. Chairman, I think I want to move the recommendation and move on. I think this is very, very uncomfortable.
Yep. Thank you very much, Councillor Guglielmi. I'm not going to take any more questions on this, otherwise we're going to end up in a spat, and I don't want that. What point of order? No. I think it's quite. What I'm going to do is I've thanked you very much for your input. I think it's what I call, and I always like this myself when it does it to me. My feet are held to the fire, therefore I know I'm being checked. And as I said, I'm pretty sure we will have a meeting of minds somewhere. We have erred on the side of caution, so we've not been over optimistic on these numbers, and therefore we take it from that point of view. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't be as heated as I'm just a mild councillor. I just want to ask a question. First of all, on page 67, the list of table 3 of all the list, are these the applications that were submitted in the last year or so that have been approved? Because I know for a fact there's 2 on there for my ward of Alresford that are not on that list. So there's 2 on that list. And compared to the other ones that have been approved for my ward of Alresford, you've got 1 in 2014, 1 in 2015, and again another in 2015. And I know for a fact that there were other ones that have been approved amongst those ones, and they're not on that list. I just want to know why they're not on the list. And it says here, plan authorities to deal with housing for elderly people on page 61. I mean, I hope that large developments, that we, especially in the rural communities, where we consider some percentage of large-scale developments, that we build 1-bedroom bungalows stroke dwellings, like they have in other areas. I mean, in Elmston Market, there's a collection of properties there that specialise in for elderly people who want to stay in the community where they know their friends are and where they go to clubs and so on. who want to downsize from their 3-4 bedroom house, but downsize to their single apartments, single dwellings. I just want to know, are we seriously looking to large scale developments, i.e., for example, my ward, where there's the 145 south of Cockaynes Lane? There are people in my part of the world who like to live in the community, live in the rural community where their friends and family still are in the community, and unfortunately they've lost their partner and they want to downsize. I would like a section where elderly people can live in the community where they love and been lived there for 30, 40, 50 years. I know of people that live in my ward have to move out of my community, move to Colston further afield, because there's no small-scale one-bedroom dwellings. And if we are going to propose to have large-scale developments, then I would like us to seriously look into that, because it does say how to deal with elderly people. Well, that's the best solution, because if you're having people move out of their 3-4 bedroom homes, move into a single bedroom dwelling, it frees up 3-4 bedroom houses that saves us building yet more large-scale housing. It frees up property so younger families can move in. I just want to question that. But on the ones I know where they're missing, I mean, there's 2 applications I am aware of in my ward that were approved about the same time as these.
Okay, Councillor Scott, I'll get you an answer. Mrs Bicknell.
Thank you, Chair. Table 3 should include all of the large sites that have got planning permission or a resolution to grant planning permission. So if the sites you're thinking of in Alresford, there are 3 listed there on page 71 in the middle of the table on 71 from Alresford, which are the larger sites. It might be that there are small sites with planning permission in Alresford, they wouldn't appear on this table.
Under 9 units.
But hopefully we haven't missed any of the large ones.
One is 10 and one is 9. And
well, if that's the case, can you, outside of the meeting, give those sites to the officers and we'll double check it?
I'm just saying, if that's the case for my ward, then it begs the question, it could be...
Yeah, no, I've already answered that. Councillor Bray. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Older people. Well, I think you've made a very good plea, and the developers here and representatives of the developers may well take it on board. And there are something called the Prince's Trust. I mean, build almshouses in rural communities and small villages. Councillor Val Guglielmi.
Can I just have a say about that? We're actually working with the council at the moment.
Yeah.
We are living with sheltered housing next door to us. They are looking into that, making that into developments for people to move into, because it's vacant at the moment anyway. So I think the council itself is looking into doing things like that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Guglielmi. Councillor Bray.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here at last. I'm very pleased to hear that from Councillor Val Guglielmi, and I support Councillor Scott's point absolutely. We are an elderly population. Demographically, I believe we're one of the oldest in Europe. So if that's the case, we should be making provision for people to live in their own towns. We really should. And I'm pleased to hear that we are. That's excellent. 2 small points. Firstly, if homes that have been built are being moved off the supply list, are they then counting against our shortfall and reducing shortfall? That's the first one. Can I come back from that? That's a yes. Thank you, that'll do for that one. Lastly, I'm a little bit concerned about one issue here, notwithstanding everything else that we've heard. The fact that we are not sure how much of our local plan would be viable enough to count against our housing supply. That being the case, I genuinely don't think we should be voting on this tonight. I think we need that information first. If we go ahead with this methodology, which doesn't include anything from the local plan, and then it turns out that actually it could have, then we've jumped the gun a little bit, I think. And I don't see an urgency for this. It's not going to slow the local plan down at all. So I'm really cautious about this. I just don't feel it's robust enough if we don't know whether sites on our emerging local plan are going to be viable to count. And I think it might be wiser for us to wait until we do know that. That just seems sensible to me. Notwithstanding anything else, that I feel just makes this a little bit unrobust, and I would rather defer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this report was really generated because both the community and councillors, particularly councillors who sit on the planning committee, are very aware that the position in terms of housing land supply is a fairly quickly moving feast. And because we haven't had a calculation for some time, thought it was important to attempt to do that and understand where we are. So that was the reason it was brought. There's no sort of absolute need to make a decision about the current position tonight, but you know, it does have some advantages of getting some information out in the public domain about where we think we are. It's only ever a calculation at a point in time. And there's nothing that says that you have to have assessed every element in every detail in order to be able to produce a calculation. What I was referring to was the MPPF, where it says in order to include a site, you do need to be confident that it is viable.
No, I get that.
Because you're not confident that all the sites are viable doesn't mean to say you cannot make a calculation. And I think, you know, what follows from that is when we bring, if you were to agree this tonight, when we bring sort of confirmation of the number, recalculate the number after the end of March, we will have additional information to be able to make the calculation more certain and hopefully to, yes, bring in some sites that we haven't been able to at this stage. But I don't think that damages actually looking at the figures tonight.
Councillor Bray.
Yeah, to quickly come back on that, and it seems sensible to me if we just had a very small amendment at the end, which says that when we, or you can word this better than I, Councillor Turner, I'm sure you can wax lyrical, we need something just to make it clear that when the figures are available with regard to the emerging local plan, they can, our methodology can be updated to include them. What I don't want is to pass this as our methodology and leave us in a position where we never can include them. I don't want that to accidentally happen.
That doesn't affect the methodology. Yeah. Oh, that doesn't affect the methodology. We're only discussing numbers. We're not discussing what we do with the numbers, which is the methodology. And this recommendation is how we deal with the numbers. Yeah, okay. I'm going to allow you 1 minute while I'm counting.
Thank you. Within part 2 of this recommendation, it says, notes the predicted 5-year housing land supply of 4.4 years. So actually it is about numbers. And I would like to propose that in fact we take out number 2 entirely, because we cannot be sure that that 4.4 year number is correct. I have evidence here that demonstrates that it is not correct.
I will take that as a substantive motion. So I've got a proposal. Yes, you'll make the main. Yeah, thank you. So let's get this completely clear. Yes, I've got that. The count. I have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation. And I'm now going to. I also have a proposer and a seconder for an amendment to that recommendation, and I'm going to take the vote on the proposer. On the amendment. So all those in favour of the amendment as proposed by Councillor Everett and seconded by Councillor Bray, please.
Chairman, can I clarify what we are voting? Because I've got councillors here to the right of me who are saying what are we voting on.
I'm trying to be,
we need to be crystal clear.
Yeah. What has been asked in a substantive motion is that we only that number 2 of the recommendation is removed. So you'd only have item 1 and item 3. Yeah. No. I know. This is what I'm saying. You know, I'm leaving it to you, the committee, to decide. As regards is, we are discussing the methodology. We arrive at the 4.4 item. Yeah.
Chair.
1 moment, please.
Just a clarification as well. In the recommendations, on most of them, apart from one, we are just noting.
That's correct.
We're not agreeing and saying that's set in stone. We are noting these comments. We're not agreeing that that is the be-all and end-all. It's a note.
Well, thank you very much for that comment, Councillor Henderson. I completely agree with you. But we have an amendment. I've taken the amendment, and I'd like all those to show in favour of that amendment. Please show.
That's 5 in favour, Chair.
Thank you. All those against?
77 and 80.
Yeah, that falls. I now go back to the original recommendation that, as read out previously. I'm happy to read it out again if anyone would like me to.
No, it's printed.
That's fine, as printed. Thank you very much. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. And no abstentions. Thank you very much, committee. And thank you, Councillor Everett, for all your hard work. I've done something similar on other things, and I do know, so well done. Thank you. Right. 84, A4, 81. Thank you. Yeah. First one to say house gets to go home early. Yeah. Authorities Monitoring Report 2015-2016. Yep. And just to read the recommendation, that the Local Plan Committee notes the Authorities Monitoring Report for 2015-2016 as attached in Appendix 1 and agrees to its publication on the Council's website. 2, notes the five-year housing and land supply position. Mrs Bicknell.
Thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of this report is for the committee to note the Council's Authorities Monitoring Report for the year 2015 to 2016. So that's April 2015 through to the end of March 2016, and the five-year housing land supply position. The report focuses on policy development for housing need and housing supply. You'll note that it refers to the housing target of 550 homes per year, and the five-year housing requirement of 4420 or 884 per year, taking into account undersupply. So I won't go, you'll be pleased to know, I don't intend to go into this in a lot of detail because we've covered the methodology in the last discussion, but this report follows the methodology that you've just agreed in the previous report, and it uses the figures for the 5 years starting a year earlier than the last report. Okay, so it's the calculations are actually set out for you in the report, but the conclusion of using that methodology with the previous year's figures is that at the end of March last year, the council had a total supply of homes of 3 years. So you can see from that the position has increased significantly, albeit we're not all completely clear and happy yet about exactly what our position is at the moment. It has undoubtedly increased significantly. The Authorities Monitoring Report also looks at the progress of plan making, and it notes the preferred options consultation that was undertaken last summer, and that a new local development scheme has been reported to the committee today, and that you approved that to extend the period for preparation of the submission version of the local plan. So, Chair, back to the recommendation that you've already drawn to committee's attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs Bicknell. Members, any questions?
Noted.
Any? No? Right, thank you. If that's the case, may I have a proposer and a seconder? Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you very much. All those in favour, please show. Against?
Clear majority, but not everybody.
Three against.
4 against.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah, thank you very much. Got a recommendation?
And just to agree that we publish it.
Yeah, so we've agreed to publish it. Fine, thank you. Right, so I'm just going through it all. All right, lovely. So thank you very much. The date of the next meeting is scheduled for 6 p.m. on Thursday the 20th of April. Yep. I'm at here, same place. May I thank you all for attending, and may I thank you all for your input. It's been a hard evening, but a good one, and the authorities have come out of it better. So thank you very much.